You are listening to Talking Star Wars.
Hello, Star Wars fans. I'm Alex,
And I'm Connor.
and today we are going to talk about Star Wars. So this is episode 69, one of our episodes where we investigate a force and spotlight a force power. And the force power we would like to spotlight today is the presence of the Force Ghost.
Just surprising, like, I look at the Force Ghost, and if we take a look at what happens just chronologically as far as release dates go, Force powers in general are always strange. We don't get telekinesis until The Empire Strikes Back. We get a general sense of surroundings in Star Wars, but we also get the hints of the Force Ghost with Obi-Wan Kenobi being able to communicate with Luke. We see them commune at the very end of the film, and it's something that's built into the fabric of the Jedi and their mythos.
So we see the ability of a dead Jedi to communicate with someone else from the very first Star Wars movie when Obi-Wan speaks to Luke, does not yet appear physically, but does speak to Luke on his Death Star run, tells him the Force will be with him always. And I would argue that we do see telekinesis in that movie when Vader Force chokes Admiral Monty.
That's true. That's true. I saw that kind of as a mental trick, almost like these are not the droids you're looking for. It's like you're choking right now. But I believe that definitely becomes more seen as telekinesis the more the Force is understood.
Yeah, he's
Yeah, I
literally
can see that
squeezing
being telekinesis. Yeah, the life
squeezing his
force.
windpipe with the Force. Yeah.
Mhm.
But so the first Force Ghost we ever see, if we're looking at release order of Star Wars media, is Obi-Wan. And
Mhm.
he first appears in actual ghostly form in The Empire Strikes Back. When he appears to Luke, when he's almost dying on Hoth, tells him to go to the Dagobah system. So this is telling us a few things as we learn about Force Ghosts to start with. One, they have agency and they have will. This
Mhm.
is not like a memory imprint of someone. This is not recorded messages left in the Force. This is a survival of Obi-Wan's personality, goals, and drive that has lingered on literally after death as his soul has merged with the living Force.
And he's not haunting anything or anyone. He has business that he needs to take care of, but he's completing that by actively communicating with the living world.
And we'll just finish out the original trilogy. So we see that's Obi-Wan
Hmm.
in The Empire Strikes Back, and that's the entire appearance of him as a Force Ghost. But then we get much more Force Ghost action in Return of the Jedi,
Hmm.
where we have Obi-Wan reappear to debate and disagree and argue with Yoda on Dagobah.
And he
Uh,
sits down.
though,
He sits down on a log, which I think was just to put Luke at ease and make it seem like, I'm not talking to a strange dead man.
yeah, he didn't need to sit down, but he did but again, this shows, I mean, even though he's disagreeing with Yoda, this
Hmm.
shows again that this is not just he's not also all powerful or all wise. Obi-Wan is
Yeah.
powerful and wise, and he maybe has more access to more wisdom and perspective, having been dead and merged with the living force. But he is not omnipotent, nor is he omniscient. So
Hmm.
he is able to provide his own perspectives and his own guidance to Luke still, but he remains sort of the soul of a mortal man with still the same fallibility. He he and Yoda also beg Luke not to leave for I forget he does appear in ghostly form on in Empire Strikes Back as well to beg Luke not to go to Bespin to fight Darth Vader.
Hmm.
And Luke disagrees. And do we think that Ben was telling the right thing to do? That's up to the viewer. Obi-Wan is certainly not presented as infallible, but we understand his viewpoint.
Hmm. And we see this carried on, as we go from Return of the Jedi, we see a couple more Force ghosts. We see that Yoda and Anakin Skywalker take, their place as Force ghosts. Later on in canon, we see both return. Yoda giving advice to Luke as an old man in Ahch-To, and Anakin giving advice to Ahsoka in the world between worlds.
And we also get Luke returning as a Force ghost to give advice to Rey when she's about
Hmm.
to distance herself from the galaxy. And in one of actually the more powerful scenes in a relatively uneven movie. telling Rey, "I was wrong," which
Hmm.
I actually really like for Luke, who had trouble admitting that he was wrong. Admitting fault was not one of Luke Skywalker's strong character traits.
Hmm.
Uh, his eyes never on where he was, um, but and able to pass that wisdom on to Rey. So those are our Force ghosts that we also see in the sequel trilogy. They, along with Leia, showing up briefly, not speaking and not really showing any agency, um, but there when Rey sees
Hmm.
a vision of them.
Which, shows the either strength of the Skywalker family or some unseen connection with the Force that Leia had, which she undoubtedly has, and I hope is explored more at some point. Um, but
Yeah,
it shows again how the family is unified again in the Force.
yeah. And there's not really any Force ghosts that appear in the prequel trilogy, and we'll talk about some other edge cases here. But before we dig into more just talking about the depiction of the Force ghost, there are two things we should talk about.
Hmm.
One, what are the powers and limitations of someone who is portraying themselves as a Force ghost?
Hmm.
And then where are they coming from? Why are there not thousands of ghostly Jedi walking around populating the galaxy? And
Sure.
there are two reasons for that we'll get into. But first, let's talk about the apparent powers or lack thereof
Hmm.
of a Jedi who has had their personality survive merging with the living force after death.
This
Um,
almost seems to be hinging on the viewer's Force sensitivity. So when Luke is beginning his journey uh, through the Force, he can hear Ben's voice. A little bit later, he can see Ben distant, in the snow. By Return of the Jedi, he's sitting down on a log having a conversation and a cup of coffee with the guy. So the more Force sensitive that Luke becomes, the more clearly he's able to interact with Ben.
yep, I see, because we also see that in Ahsoka, where Sabine, who is only very minorly force sensitive,
Hmm.
she has been instructed in the ways of the Jedi, and because all living beings are connected to the Force, like Chirrut in way, she has some ability to manipulate the Force, though at great cost, and she is never going to be an incredibly powerful Force sensitive Jedi. So she
Hmm.
is not really able to see the Force ghost of Anakin. But Ahsoka, who is both his former Padawan and a
Ahsoka.
powerful Jedi, one of the most powerful Jedi remaining in the galaxy, or either galaxy
Hmm.
in existence, is able to see Anakin clearly. So I think they require a force sensitive viewer because you need to be attuned to the Force to see the Force ghost. When Luke sees the three Jedi Force ghosts appear in the Ewok village, no one else sees them. Does Leia see them or not? Could be ambiguous, but Luke is the
Hmm.
only one who for certain sees Anakin Skywalker, Yoda, and Obi-Wan Kenobi show
Certainly.
up at the celebration of the defeat of the second Death Star. Two, so yeah, they require a force sensitive viewer is one. Two, they themselves still command the powers of the force. So
Hmm.
even though they're not omniscient, we still see Obi-Wan able to somewhat see the future in the same kind of precognition that Jedi show, telling him that he cannot interfere once Luke fights Darth Vader, sees that this could lead him down a dark path. So we see him showing the same precognition.
Hmm.
Uh,
We see Yoda able to call lightning down from the sky and being able to, later in that trilogy, Luke being able to pull his X-Wing from the water finally after decades of being unable to. Um, but yeah, the Force ghosts are in tune with the Force. They're capable of great feats.
we see Luke able to force manipulate objects after his death. He catches the lightsaber that Rey throws by manipulating it with the Force, his own former repaired lightsaber.
Hmm.
And we even see potentially the presence and ghosts of many Jedi empowering Rey in her confrontation with Palpatine, her um, grandfather.
Hmm.
So they are force sensitive and able to some degree manipulate the Force. Uh, though the primary power seems to be speaking. There
Hmm.
is a novel, Shadow of the Sith, where Luke is able to contact the Force ghost of Anakin Skywalker, who he has seen before, shortly after his death.
Hmm.
But it's challenging because, um, one, because of how long Anakin has been dead, and two, Luke has a kind of fraught relationship with his father. He did
Hmm.
inflict the injuries that resulted in Darth Vader's death, partially. So,
Understandably,
but he, yeah, but he is
self-defense.
able to, yeah, he is able to go to a powerful, force-sensitive location and contact his father, and receive advice, which is in his Anakin Skywalker's Force Ghost is aware of things, same way that Obi-Wan
Hmm.
was. Yes, I do not know everything, but there is a powerful dark sider who is attempting to manipulate you. They're on this far planet. I will help you how I can. So we see these Force Ghosts know even more in death than they did in life.
Hmm. Anakin is a fascinating case because you know, force ghosting, becoming a force ghost process is rare. It's not something that is very much seen outside of the original and sequel trilogies. So Anakin is even amongst those few cases a rare case because when he appears as young Anakin Skywalker. Back before George Lucas started fan editing his own movies, uh, Anakin was portrayed by an old man, the same old man that portrayed Vader out of his helmet. So at some point, George Lucas decided, well, Anakin's soul died after, being turned into Vader. So when he returns to the Force, lo and behold, he is this light side, youthful figure.
Yeah,
Strange.
he appears as an older man to Luke when Luke is in his own middle age as a Jedi Master. And he does appear older even to Ahsoka somewhat. Um, he appears as Darth Vader would have had he not been wounded on Mustafar.
Sure.
Um, Very dangerous, older, red lightsaber, incredibly powerful in the Force. So,
And
but there are
arguably,
things
he's
that,
portraying himself as different ages also. He's Clone Wars era. He is, adult era Anakin.
yeah, a potential future version of himself that never existed that Ahsoka feels guilty about.
Hmm.
So, but there are things that Force Ghosts cannot do. We do not see them able to directly confront or even stop any person or other Force sensitive individual. So we don't have Obi-Wan able to help Luke against Darth Vader. Luke is not able to help Rey against the Emperor directly.
Hmm.
The Jedi are able to help Rey, but only after they have a dyad situation, and the Palpatine is calling upon the power of a ton of ancient Sith, so the Jedi are able to lend their own strength as well. But generally, to keep the balance of the Force, or even if they're unable to, the ghostly Jedi do not directly help in confrontations. They provide counsel, information, advice, even showing off some Force powers, but we don't see ghostly Yoda going and murking Palpatine in his sleep.
Hmm. And this is just as much for, convenience as it is for the plot, and the character's growth, who the mentor is trying to guide. If it was so easy, there wouldn't have to be a hero. The mentors would be able to take care of it themselves.
Yeah, so there's a practical storytelling element, and it is supported by the world building.
Hmm.
So I think that leads us to our next topic, and that talks about a Force Ghost we haven't talked about yet. The first one, which is Qui-Gon Jinn, and how does someone learn to become a Force Ghost in the first place? Because this, much like any Force power, is a skill that must be learned by someone who is sensitive and powerful in the Force. So
I
the
think
first, go
yeah,
ahead.
comes down to this idea of Qui-Gon Jinn having his own method, his own mindset of what the Force is, and his own kind of relationship to the Force that wasn't sort of as dogmatic as his colleagues, I would say. And he might have been interested in some niche Force studies, different corners of the religion. Uh, we have at one point our heroes in the Clone Wars encountered the father, son, and daughter, who are this like holy triad of force power. But we also see Yoda later interact with these wills, who are, I think, seven different deities that control different emotions, and they are the guardians of the Force. So Qui-Gon might have communed with these later beings in order to uh, just learn the secrets that the Jedi don't themselves know.
Definitely. So Qui-Gon Jinn definitely believed in a more mystical interpretation of the Force, regarding it not necessarily as this only like energy field that bound the galaxy together, which is one way he describes it, but also as the living force, where it has a will of its own
Mhm.
and must be obeyed. And so we learn after Yoda investigates, after receiving his own visions, that Qui-Gon Jinn had pursued some of these more ancient mystical traditions and had gone and communed with the wills himself. And though Qui-Gon Jinn was not able to master it easily, he was the first person to try it that we know of ever, because
Yeah.
the, whether this was very ancient knowledge that is uncovered, it's unclear. But I'm always the fan that not everything needs to be ancient and rediscovered. Not everything is ancient
Oh
Rome.
no. Mhm.
Sometimes there are new things that are discovered and put into practice. And I would say that being able to retain your consciousness after death in the living force is one of them. So the wills decide to impart this wisdom to Qui-Gon Jinn, seeing this great imbalance in the force coming forward. And this establishes that if you are, even after you merge with the living force, if there is someone to instruct you who is able to retain their own consciousness, you can be instructed in how to become a force ghost after your own death.
Mhm.
It takes time and is dependent on how powerful you are. Qui-Gon Jinn, who had to figure it out himself, it takes him 10 years
Yeah.
to be able to
Meditation.
manifest physically. He's able to manifest his voice somewhat to Yoda, and also manifest him. The only place he's able to manifest physically is on the planet of the son, mother, and daughter,
Mhm.
um, on Mortis during the Clone Wars. Otherwise, it takes 10 years later for Obi-Wan to finally open himself up enough for then Qui-Gon Jinn to appear to him as a Force ghost in the
Sure.
glowing blue non-flesh.
Mhm. So yeah, I think that it's just a matter of being in commune with the Force. Just he understood better. He's the Martin Luther of your Star Wars Jedi. He just found the a true way, a truer way, and potentially nowhere else do we ever hear of Force ghosts. I don't can't even remember in Legends if there have been old Republic Jedi who have become Force ghosts. It's just not something that was seen that often. It was novel for Luke to become a Force ghost in the Star Wars Legacy comic book series. So, for
The
Qui-Gon to be able to do this is legendary. It's mythic.
Yeah, even in the Knights of the Old Republic games, where you would expect to see tons of crazy force powers, we only see a couple of potential force ghosts, and they are largely practitioners of the Sith soul binding technique more so than
Mhm.
force ghosts, which is
Sure.
a related but very distinct power that we'll touch on, but explore in another episode.
Yeah.
So I would say that the force ghost ability to retain your consciousness after death is a new ability that was instructed by the will. It was Qui-Gon Jinn received instruction from by the wills, who are manifestations of the living force. And then he was able to master this after his death. Obi-Wan or Obi-Wan then received that instruction from Qui-Gon while Obi-Wan was still alive, which is why he was able to quickly appear to Luke once
Mhm.
Luke had embraced his force sensitivity enough. And Yoda also studied the same from Qui-Gon Jinn and received his own vision and made his own studies
Mhm.
while he was on Dagobah and after his own communion with the wills and confronting his own shortcomings and his own fears. But then, I mean, Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, never received any instruction on how to keep his consciousness after death. So it
Mhm.
was almost certainly an ability that was instructed in him. And I guess after you're dead, time has very little meaning. So
Especially for
my
him, he's able to
interpretation
go backwards.
So yeah, my interpretation of how he suddenly appears so quickly at the end of Return of the Jedi, just from a storytelling perspective, it's very neat. It shows that the Jedi who is Anakin Skywalker lives on. And
Mhm.
two, I mean, that's the metaphysical equivalent of Obi-Wan having one arm under one shoulder and Yoda having one arm under the other. And like, okay, well, they'll take you this far. The
Sure.
next time he's able to appear is like 10, 15 years later to Luke. And even
Mhm.
in the Ahsoka show, it's what, like, yeah, like 10 years,
About
7
that same
years.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, seven
Yeah.
years after the Battle of Endor. So it takes a while for Anakin to be able to get his metaphysical shit together
Mhm.
again to continue to appear to people. Though I guess that I would agree with Connor's point that it also depends on the attunement and need of the people who need the Force Ghost, because I think it requires a connection to the living world to appear.
Mhm. Trying to think of other aspects of the Force Ghost. This is as far away from canon as you can get. So it's in the video game Force Unleashed. It's in the DLC of that game with the alternate ending, where we get to see Starkiller, our now Vader level villain, go toe to toe with Obi-Wan Kenobi's Force Ghost, wielding a lightsaber uh, immediately, pretty much immediately after his death. So there's no, mystic time to learn. We have Obi-Wan fall and his Force Ghost remain with his lightsaber fighting you. So I don't think that is stuck around so far as much as canonicity goes.
Yeah, that's about as canon as me playing as Obi-Wan Kenobi's ghost in Lego Star Wars.
Hmm.
Um, so that is about, I think, all of the Force Ghosts that we've seen in canon. We have a single inception point for where the art was discovered. We know how it was passed on from person to person, sometimes before, sometimes after that individual's death. We see how the Force Ghosts then serve to maintain the balance of the Force, doing the will of the living Force with their best of the personalities and knowledge they had while alive, and some they've gained while
Hmm.
dead. And there is this sense that it is not a permanent state of affairs. Like, we don't think that Obi-Wan is going to be able to stick around forever. We actually do
Sure.
not see the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan at all after Luke sees him after the Battle of Yavin. Um, it's Yoda that appears to him. So, and Obi-Wan has frankly been dead longer and had a shorter life. So, has Obi-Wan now let go of his individual consciousness and merged with the living force? Has Qui-Gon Jinn? Are they dormant and able to appear again in the future? We don't necessarily know those questions. My theory would be that, well, Star Wars has never been typically all about you have an immortal soul that is you distinctly that lives on forever, and
Hmm.
more about the life force that you have as part of a cosmic whole. And after you die, you do lose your consciousness, but the energy that was part of you becomes part of the living force, enriching the overall soul of the entire universe.
Hmm.
And so even if part of you is able to maintain your personality and beliefs and memories for a certain time, eventually you join the cosmic whole for your energy to then be threaded throughout the galaxy again.
That could be, and this is just a small description of trying to patch up something in canon. We see that, um, or I should say, we hear Kenobi say, "Rey, these are your first steps." During Rey's initial Force vision, clutching Luke's lightsaber. We don't know if this is something from the past. It's not a line from the past, of course. It's something that Ewan McGregor came back to record. So just at this point, is Obi-Wan Kenobi still out there in the Force, active? Has he kind of sort of drawn back slightly, where he's not there in the physical presence? He doesn't have someone there with that connection to him to call upon him, but he's still part of the living Force in the world.
And yeah, perhaps he doesn't appear physically anymore. Perhaps it is the dormancy part. Maybe he has not fully divested himself of his consciousness. Perhaps this is a vestige of his energy that was left behind in the lightsaber that Rey is activating through unconscious psychometry. We might never know.
Mhm.
But I definitely think this is not necessarily the Jedi seeking immortality. That is a Sith trait. We'll talk about that about when we talk
Yeah.
about Sith soul binding next week. But generally, I think this is just a way to attempt to. It's just almost like an emergency art. It's like the wills are like the galaxy is going to be a terrible place, and the light might be crushed for centuries. So, as a failsafe, we're going to let even some dead Jedi come back and teach their ways to their successors, so that the art
Hmm.
is not entirely lost.
Right.
Um, and Yoda is certainly not doing this to get immortal. He is ready to rest. Obi-Wan,
Hmm.
though, accepted his own death. Qui-Gon Jinn, though violently murdered, accepts the fact that that was what happened.
Hmm.
Um, we don't see anyone in the same way that Maul frantically clung to life with absolute hatred through even being bisected. And then his final words, even after he clung to life for decades after his first almost death experience, was about revenge.
Hmm.
We don't see that for the Jedi. I think you do have to be somewhat either at peace with yourself or, in the case of Anakin Skywalker, be willing to work on becoming at peace with yourself
Hmm.
again to walk the road of the Force Ghost.
Yeah, that's something that I think even Hayden Christensen has said that the Force Ghost Anakin is Anakin. Anakin was always wise and powerful. The Ghost is wise and powerful. The only thing that Anakin, as a Force Ghost, doesn't have are his attachments. He's no longer alive. He doesn't have anything in the human realm that is connecting him, drawing him, motivating him. So he can be much more of an objective mentor rather than one who is very much being manipulated by his own desires.
Yeah. And we certainly see other strange Force consciousnesses. We can talk maybe in a future episode. There is a ancient Jedi techno AI that appears in Doctor Aphra. We have other Jedi souls and bound consciousnesses that appear in other places. But I think the beginning of the Force Ghost with its agenda, memories intact, able to actually wield power, trying to counsel people who are trying to restore balance to the Force, begins with Qui-Gon Jinn and has now extended to Luke. And we'll see if that genealogy continues. Is Rey eventually going to be a Force Ghost to instruct her children? Uh, whether those are students' children or literal children, we don't know yet. If Rey will continue a bloodline or if she will continue a tradition, but or is that practice no longer needed? It was an emergency, dangerous art that was taught to a few, and after the galaxy is now more at balance, it is no longer needed until it
Hmm.
might need to be brought out again.
Yeah, it's something that shows that objectively the Jedi are a force for good. They're a force for positivity, that they've been rewarded with this. Next week, we'll get to the dark side, which, they have their means of staying alive for longer, but some may consider those means to be unnatural.
Yep. So join us. This has been our introduction and exploration of the Jedi Force Ghost and their ability to provide wise counsel after their deaths and even learn the art to do so after their demise. Join us next week for the most fearful of death from all of our Force sensitive, the Sith, who wish to prolong their lives through cloning, dark magic, binding their souls to objects, clinging to life in their body to such a degree that they crumble to ash upon their death and more.
Mhm.
So next week for Sith soul binding and artificial longevity, we'll continue to explore the dark side of keeping your consciousness around for as long as you possibly can.
Until then, we'll see you sometime soon in a galaxy right here